Here's a strange fact about the most famous wall in human history. In the 2,000 years people spent building it, the Great Wall of China almost never stopped an invasion by doing the thing walls do. It didn't get smashed. It didn't get climbed. It didn't heroically hold the line while arrows bounced off it. Most of the time, it got walked through by people who were handed the keys. Let's start with the picture in your head. You're imagining one wall, one long, unbroken ribbon of gray stone, snaking over green mountains, with those square towers every few hundred meters. You're imagining that an emperor, probably a scary one, decided one day to build it, threw 1,000,000 workers at the problem, and finished it. And then for the next 2,000 years, that wall stood there like a giant closed door, keeping horsemen out of China. It's a beautiful image. Movies love it. Video games love it. There's even a Matt Damon film where the wall exists to keep out monsters, which honestly is only slightly less fictional than the version most of us learned in school. And I want to be fair here, because this is where a lot of internet history goes wrong. The usual actually take is that the Great Wall was useless, a giant stone ego project, 2,000 years of wasted labor. That's not true either. The wall did things, important things. It just did almost none of the things you're picturing. So let's take the postcard apart, piece by piece. Starting with the part where it isn't one wall. The Great Wall is not a building. It's a habit. Before China was unified, the northern states were already building walls, earth embankments to mark territory and slow down raiders. When Qin Shi Huang unified China in 221 BC, he didn't start from scratch. He did something much more practical and much less cinematic. He took the walls that already existed, tore down the ones sitting between his own provinces, and ordered the northern ones connected up. So the very first Great Wall was a renovation project. And it wasn't stone. Most of it was rammed earth, dirt packed between wooden frames, layer by layer until it went hard. Cheap, fast, and it works as long as somebody maintains it. Nobody maintained it. Within a few centuries, most of the Qin Wall had quietly returned to being dirt, which is what dirt does. Then the Han Dynasty built their own walls and pushed them west, out into the desert corridor towards Central Asia. Different route, different purpose. We'll come back to that because it's the interesting one. Then the Northern Wei built walls. The Northern Qi built walls. The Sui repaired walls. The Jin Dynasty dug enormous defensive ditches and ramparts across the steppe frontier. Then the Mongols conquered everything. And, funny thing, the Yuan Dynasty didn't build walls. Hard to justify the budget for a northern frontier defense when your emperor is the northern frontier. And then the Ming. The Ming Dynasty, from the late 1300s onward, built the wall you have in your head. Brick, cut stone, watchtowers, the photogenic bit near Beijing that you've seen 10,000 times. That's Ming, and a lot of it is younger than the printing press in Europe. Here's the part that reframes everything. These walls are not in the same place. The Qin-era walls generally ran further north than the Ming ones. Different dynasties, different threats, different frontier, different line on the map. So when a Chinese government survey a few years back put the total length of all wall remains across all periods at over 21,000 kilometers, that's not a 21,000-kilometer wall. That's the sum total of 2,000 years of separate projects in overlapping and sometimes completely different places, most of them built by dynasties who never met each other. The Great Wall isn't a wall. It's a stack of walls, drawn by different people, on different maps, solving different problems. Which raises the obvious question. If it wasn't one impenetrable barrier, what was it actually for? Look at a picture of the wall again. But this time, ignore the wall. Look at the towers, because the towers are the technology. The wall is just the thing connecting them. The frontier ran on beacon towers, platforms where garrisons kept fuel ready to burn, smoke by day, fire by night. When a lookout spotted movement on the steppe, he lit the signal. The next tower saw it and lit theirs, then the next, then the next. A message that would take a rider days to carry could cross hundreds of kilometers in a fraction of the time. And under Ming military regulations, the signals weren't just something's happening. The number of smoke columns and cannon shots was standardized to indicate roughly how many enemies were coming. One column for a small party. More columns, bigger problem. Sit with that for a second. This is a data compression protocol running on fire in the 15th century. That's the real function. The wall wasn't there to make invasions impossible. It was there to make invasions slow and loud, because here's the strategic problem China actually had. The northern threat was cavalry. Steppe horsemen were fast, they traveled light, and their entire advantage was surprise. Hit a settlement, take the grain and the horses, be gone before an army could assemble. You cannot defeat that with speed. Chinese armies were bigger and slower. Every time. So you don't try to be faster. You change the shape of the problem. A wall does three things to a raiding party. It stops them crossing anywhere they like, which funnels them toward a handful of passes. It stops them leaving quickly, because horses and stolen livestock can't scramble over a rampart. The loot has to go back out through a gate, and it buys you the one thing you desperately need: warning time. Time to move troops to the right pass before the raiders get there. And that's before we get to the part nobody puts in movies: the paperwork. The Han frontier garrisons out in the western desert left behind thousands of documents written on bamboo and wooden slips, and archaeologists have been reading them for over a century. They're not epic, they're duty rosters, supply requests, records of who passed through, going which way, carrying what, complaints about equipment, because the wall was also a border checkpoint. It controlled who crossed, it controlled trade, it taxed trade, and along the Han's western line, it protected the caravan routes we now call the Silk Road. Walls don't just keep people out. Walls decide where the door is, and whoever controls the door controls the customs revenue. So, an early warning network, a traffic funnel, a customs barrier, a supply road, and a permanent excuse to keep soldiers stationed somewhere useful. Not a magic shield. An infrastructure project. An infrastructure has one very specific weakness, which the Mongols demonstrated, repeatedly, in the most embarrassing ways possible. 1449. The Ming Emperor, young, enthusiastic, badly advised, personally leads an enormous army north to deal with the Mongols. It goes catastrophically. The campaign collapses, the army is destroyed at a place called Tumu, and the Oirat leader Isin captures the Emperor of China alive. Now think about what that means for the wall. The wall didn't fail. The wall was fine. The wall was standing right there in excellent condition, while the emperor it was supposed to protect got taken prisoner on the wrong side of it, because he'd marched out through his own gate. Then 1550, the Mongol leader Altan Khan brings a force past the frontier defenses and reaches the outskirts of Beijing itself. He burns the suburbs. The Ming court sits inside the capital and negotiates. And what Altan Khan mostly wants isn't conquest. It's trade access. He wants the border markets opened so his people can exchange horses for Chinese goods legally instead of raiding for them. That's the pattern. Again and again, the frontier fails not because the masonry gives way, but because of what's happening behind it. Court politics, unpaid garrisons, empty granaries, commanders who'd rather not die today. Go back further, and it's the same story. When the Mongols came south against the Qing Dynasty in the early 1200s, the frontier defenses didn't hold. According to most accounts, part of the reason is that the tribes stationed to guard that frontier changed sides. The defenses worked exactly as designed. The defenders just stopped being defenders. A wall is not a machine. A wall is a promise that someone will be standing on it. And in the spring of 1644, that promise came due. At the single most important gate on the entire line, Shanhai Pass, the eastern end of the Ming Wall, where the mountains meet the sea, the choke point, the hinge of the whole northern defense. Beyond it, the Manchus, organized, disciplined, with a state and an army and every intention of taking China. They'd been pressing at this frontier for decades. They had not broken through. Holding the pass, a Ming general named Wu Sangui, commanding some of the best troops the dynasty had left. And then, in April 1644, the Ming Dynasty falls, and the Manchus have nothing to do with it. A rebel army under Li Zicheng takes Beijing, not from the north, from the inside. Years of famine, unpaid soldiers, a treasury that had run dry, taxes that had broken the countryside. the last Ming Emperor Chongzhen walks out of his palace and hangs himself on the hill behind it. So now picture Wu Sangui. He is standing on the greatest fortification on earth, in command of a real army, and there is no longer a government behind him. The capital is gone, the emperor is dead. He has two options, and neither of them is keep guarding this wall for a country that no longer exists. Option: submit to Li Zicheng, the rebel who just took his capital. Option 2. Make a deal with the Manchus. He chose the Manchus. He opened the pass. The Qing army came through Shanhai Pass, joined Wu Sangui, and crushed Li Zicheng's forces in the field. Within weeks, they were in Beijing, and the Qing dynasty would rule China for the next 2.5 centuries. That's the ending. That's how the story of the Great Wall actually finishes. The wall wasn't breached. There was no siege. No battering ram, no ladders, no heroic last stand on the ramparts. The greatest defensive structure ever built by human beings was defeated by a man with a decision to make, and nobody left to make it for. Somebody opened the door, from the inside, because the empire behind the door had already died of something else entirely. And the Qing, once they were in charge, largely stopped maintaining it. Why would they? The wall existed to separate the steppe from China. The Qing ruled both. The wall didn't fall. It just stopped meaning anything. So what do we do with this? Not the Great Wall was useless. It genuinely wasn't. For centuries, it did real work. It slowed raiders. It funneled them into places where armies could meet them. It moved information faster than a horse. It taxed trade. It made the frontier legible to a government far away. That's not nothing. That's an enormous amount of something. But it was never the thing on the postcard. It was never a closed door. It was a very expensive way to buy time and information. And time and information are only worth anything if the state behind them is functional enough to use them. Which is the part that should make you a little uncomfortable. Because we still do this. We still build the visible thing. The wall, the firewall, the border fence, the security checkpoint, the impressive line on the map that says we are protected. And they're often useful. But the failure almost never comes the way the picture suggests. It comes through the gate. Through the person with the keys, who hasn't been paid in months, and who has quietly concluded that the thing behind him isn't worth dying for. The Ming didn't lose because their wall was too short. They lost because the empire behind it was hollow, and a hollow empire with a magnificent wall is still a hollow empire. The wall was the last thing standing. It just wasn't the thing that mattered. If you want more history, where the real mechanism turns out to be nothing like the story, subscribe. And tell me in the comments which everybody knows fact you want taken apart next.